on. Let's talk to William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party, who came out some weeks ago, have always talked a lot of common sense, and said that they were against the lockdown. William, very good morning to you.
Morning, great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for talking to us again. It seems as though the tide is turning slightly. It seems to me like there's enough people now to start pushing the government towards a more sensible approach.
That's true. I think the tide is turning slowly. I think what we've witnessed on a global scale actually is just a monumental policy error, something which has been a sort of synchronized policy error all around the world, and this government's joined in. And slowly but surely people are realizing the long-term consequences. And I think you only have to go back to February, March, when it all started, to ask yourself a basic question. Where was the cost-benefit analysis to have a look at the cost of lockdowns?
Yeah.
They've been making policy basically on what I would describe as a fundamentally irresponsible basis, because they've never seen the bigger picture. They've only seen the COVID picture. And it is literally a policy error which I think could have generational consequences.
But I still think there's time to pull it back from the brink, William, if they do the right thing, rather than doing the wrong thing, because all they have to now do is look at what the information is in the round, not just what the scientists are telling them, not just what Valence and Whitty are telling them, but what the business community is telling them, what these other medical people are telling them. I mean, these doctors who have written this global declaration are very highly regarded doctors. They're not quacks. They're not kind of, loonies from YouTube. These are people who are highly respected, highly academic, and who see that there is a much bigger medical problem now than the virus itself.
Yeah, there's always been an alternative view on the science and on the policy prescriptions, how you tackle the virus. There always has been. The trouble is it hasn't been represented on the government's committees. So you've had, the Oxford Group and others criticising government policy from the start. But part of the problem, and I have to say this is a major problem in this country particularly, is that political opposition to these measures, these mistakes, has been subcontracted out to a series of academics.
Right.
So, it's actually fallen to them to challenge the government on what they're doing. And meanwhile, every time the government's implemented another stage of its stop-go policy, its sort of haphazard sharp turns policy, every single time the Starmer and the Lib Dems and the SNP have tried to gold plate it. So they haven't challenged any of it at any stage. The only real challenge has been from one or two journalists like Hitchens and Toby Young and other people, and some experts. So our political class has utterly failed, I think.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, you would have thought, would have got behind, say, Andy Burnham's suggestions from Manchester, or some of the other local mayors and local councils that are asking for greater local powers to be more specific about lockdowns, because what we do know is that an awful lot of the local lockdowns have not only not worked, but they've seen increases in the infection rate while being locked down.
Yeah, I'm afraid the evidence for lockdowns overall is just pretty poor. You can't really deduce efficacy from lockdowns on the national data. If you compare the countries that have had very harsh lockdowns, like Spain and others, their death rates are very similar to those that haven't. And we've been arguing, particularly, at the start of this, Mike, we gave the government the benefit of the doubt. It's a new disease, and we didn't criticise. And there was a sort of, a sense of we're all in it together.
Yeah, and I think we were right to do that, by the way.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I don't regret doing so at all. But as it becomes, as policy lurches, they have this 3-week lockdown, which became a 7-week lockdown. And then they had a massive enthusiastic reopening where they're actually bribing people, paying people to go out. And then suddenly they slam the brakes on. And the hospitality industry doesn't know where to turn, literally. And I see New York are implementing a series of local lockdowns. And bar owners and restaurant owners, in that city, they only opened up in last week.
Yeah.
And they were closed. And a lot of them didn't bother opening up. You just can't run a society like this. What they're missing is basically that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. They've got to implement a series of things that we can keep a hold of long term, which actually might just get back to the four things which are shield the vulnerable, isolate if you're ill, wash, and distance. And those four things you can do pretty much forever.
Because it's an interesting sort of state of affairs when you look at, for example, I was looking in one of the papers this morning, the lowest rated places in Britain. Most of them seem to be in the south of England. The highest rated seems to be in the north. Something similar happened in America, where at first New York was in a bad way and Florida wasn't. And then it went sort of flipped the other way around. So the virus seems to travel. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I'm sure that the scientists could explain it one way or another. It's nothing to do with necessarily the way that communities live. It just seems to geographically move around. I mean, the southwest, I'm told now, is practically virus-free, and certainly parts of the southeast are as well. London, cases are going up, but yet nobody in London has died of COVID for an entire week.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the seasonality is a massive factor in this, Mike, and in the United States, the thing that explains the steepness of the curves in the northeast, as opposed to, say, Arizona or Florida, is climate, actually, fundamentally. Yeah. So they would have, I mean, it's almost like being in a different country.
Yeah.
So the shape of the curve would be entirely different. I mean, obviously, you know, certain areas of the country are having more difficulty. But what I despair of is the lack of responsibility taken by government to the effects of what they're implementing. It's as if, you know, 20%. I mean, there's always this false dichotomy in the debate between lives and livelihoods. But what they don't seem to realize is that destroying livelihoods costs lives. That's the point.
Yes.
They're missing. I was talking about it.
And when you see, as I say, Matt Hancock coming out and saying basically, well, we won't be able to do cancer care for people if nobody does what they're told. I mean, I find that quite offensive, apart from anything else.
Well, it's appalling. Some of the rhetoric, you know, some of the rhetoric against young people, against students. You saw this very recently. Students go back to university and they're being demonized for spreading it. And again, I'm sorry, but I think they've just got the broad policy wrong. You know, some academics have made the point that actually, if students attended lectures, socialized throughout the entire first 2 terms, we may get to a situation in this country where by March or April, very large numbers of the undergraduate population would have actually, you know, the virus would have passed through and they wouldn't be there. They'd have built up some immunity and they wouldn't be there to spread it after that. And I think actually that's a far better result, a far better aim actually than shielding. I mean, basically, Mike, they're shielding the people that aren't vulnerable. And again, it's a point which has been made. You know, and it hasn't been the official opposition. It's been a point that's been made by groups like Us for Them, complaining about the policy in relation to schools and children, but not by any official opposition, which is appalling. No,
well, Keir Starmer said absolutely nothing this morning about lockdown. He said nothing about it really throughout the lockdown, other than that he fully supports the government, while then slagging them off for not doing anything right. And it seems to me that in universities and in the halls of residence, the lockdown isn't working anyway, because if the spreading of the disease is still going on, and it's very high in places like Sheffield and Newcastle, I understand, you know, everybody's getting it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, kettling 700 or 800 students in halls of residence is sure to spread it throughout that population. But they're missing the point. It's actually a benefit if the virus spreads through the undergraduate population. I mean, you'd be in a better position, as I say, in April if that happened. But the broader picture is never seen. I mean, and there isn't any opposition basically beyond, as I say, journalists and other experts.
Yeah. Well, I bet you any money today, Keir Starmer on PMQs, the Prime Minister's questions, will go banging on again about the test and trace failings. And that doesn't appear to work at all. I'm not even sure if there's any point in doing it, to be honest, because, you know, telling people to isolate themselves when they might not even have any clue that they've got COVID and might never have COVID is a nonsense, particularly if they're going to lose their jobs over it.
Yeah, and the losing of the jobs and the loss of your tax base are going to have very, very long-term implications. I have to say, one of the things that's disappointed me, and I suspect is one of the reasons for the policy being implemented, is that certainly if you look at the councils in the northeast of England that decided to lock down recently, the policymakers that were responsible for that, which are basically the leaders of those councils and in particular the officers that give them the advice, are pretty much insulated from the effects of that advice. Certainly in the short term. I think probably in the long term, they may find out that destruction of your tax base is probably not good if you want good services. So there's a lot to come, down the line there. But basically, people are making policy that aren't having any of the consequences. And I think it partly explains what's happened. A complete failure to understand that there's anything else on the other side of the net and to take responsibility for it. That's what we've seen. I mean, but it is changing. I mean, I do detect, in the last couple of months, there has been more opposition to this. And certainly I haven't seen it so much in the polling evidence yet. But mark my word, Mike, by next summer, when you've got some of the full effects and the insolvencies have been through and you've got another million unemployed, people will be saying, actually, I think the lockdown stop-go policy was really very foolish.
I think we'll see a change in government policy. I'm going to put myself out on a limb here before Christmas. I think they are frightened now of going too far. We've seen in Scotland Nicola Sturgeon already taking a step back from the brink, because 2 days ago there were some very heavy hints that she was going to give them a 2-week, circuit breaker lockdown, which would have meant very little, apart from the fact that it would have killed off the pub industry. Many pubs that have just reopened, many hospitality venues that have reconfigured themselves, and they would not stand for it. It looks now today that she's going to make an announcement this afternoon, which is going to be less stringent than that. She will be putting some more restrictions on, but they won't be as bad. So I think the common sense is getting through. I certainly sensed from Rishi Sunak's statement and Boris Johnson's statement yesterday that there is room for manoeuvre now. They're not being quite so hard-line. Boris saying, I know people hate me. I know people hate this. I hate it. I'm not keen on it. We must find another way. I think there's definitely a way through it.
Yeah, I think that's beginning to happen. And I think Peter Hitchens predicted that by next summer, when all the real consequences come through, everyone was saying, I was against it all along. Yeah, and you will see that, but it's been very slow. I think another thing, Mike, which is probably likely to happen, is the steepness of the viral curve in the winter will be there, because it's there anyway. I mean, far more people will have pneumonia and flu anyway than will have COVID. I think. Yeah. You could even see the average fall.
Well, that's already the case, isn't it? I mean, COVID did not even figure, and I know we're talking about August, did not even figure in one of the top 10 causes of death in August.
No, it will. I mean, and I think a lot of economists that have advised us have said actually that the long range death rate, they're above the curve, when the year's out, actually will be slightly below, and you might end up with something like 50,000 excess deaths. Remember that in 1969, flu basically took 80,000 to 90,000 people in the UK, and there wasn't any of the freak out. Or the
Well, I was a child then. I don't remember being terrified into having to behave in a particular way. I don't even remember the fact that there was a flu epidemic.
No, I was too. I was 4, but I don't really remember it. But the fact is, it was there, and it did claim more lives, I think, than COVID will this year in the UK. Yeah. As I say, I just think going forward, when we're dealing with the long-term consequences of all this stuff, which could last a decade, it's sort of generational actually. People will look at it and think, what on earth were they doing? And it's policy based on panic. That's what they're gonna. But there'll be a lot of denial, Mike. There'll be a huge amount of denial, and there'll be a huge amount of rhetoric that we had no choice and all the rest of it. But actually, they did. It was a point that was made about, as you say at the start, about the SAGE committee. The SAGE committee had a particular view on it, and there were others outside that committee that took a different one.
Yeah, and they weren't prepared to change it. Let's have a read of this tweet just before we go. That's from Michael. He says, "I was made redundant from the hospitality sector thanks to COVID. There's no jobs now in this sector due to continued restrictions. I'm 52, too late to train as something else. I've supported Boris, but this needs to end now. Let's get on with living and working." And there'll be loads of people like Michael who, it's all very well for Boris to say, "Oh yeah, we'll retrain everybody. They can all work in the sort of, wind farm sector." Oh, really? Well, that's going to be a bit more difficult to do than to say, I suspect.
No, I saw Johnson's statement yesterday, and it was typical Johnson, not very much detail. Some of the amounts of money that he was suggesting for renewable energy were almost token, actually, if you look at the grander scheme of things. I just think we'll be living with this for years and years, unfortunately, and there'll be a lot of denial. And meanwhile, as you say, people will lose their jobs and won't get back in. Businesses will be wrecked. And, actually, the other point, Mike, is that it was what I've really objected to in this, because my party, the SDP, is a communitarian party. I know that people that are skeptical about lockdowns are considered libertarian, but there's a good case, libertarian case in terms of freedom, but there's a massive communitarian case against these indiscriminate lockdowns. And Oxfam published a report the other day which was estimating the amount of global hunger that will be caused by supply lines and things changing. And they actually estimated that 12,000 people globally could lose their lives as a result of hunger due to the lockdowns. We've got to wake up and start thinking about the consequences of what we do. And the government has got to start taking responsibility for that. That's what we need.
Yeah, absolutely right. William, thanks very much indeed, as ever, for talking to us. William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party, talks